Another interesting topic I wanted to touch on was the idea of uh, navigating uncertainty, of course. But how do you navigate uncertainty? So, having being someone that read Nassim Taleb's work for years, trying to understand, um, uh, one of the things you can do is you can kind of be like you can kind of go back. I think they call this being a reactionary. It's someone that goes backward in their thought process in terms of like traditional stuff, marriage, kids, conservatism, preserving traditional ways of life, religion. So that's kind of one of the ways you can sort of anchor yourself in a world of uncertainty and a world of change. The example I often think about is the Orthodox Church and how they were able to kind of maintain their tradition for so long despite so many civilizations and whatnot. And of course, there's a lot of Orthodox churches here in Batumi. And people that really follow the Orthodox faith, they typically have a bit of a pattern in terms of what their life looks like, right? They're kind of told to get married, to have children, to go to church, to participate in these rituals, and go to these big, beautiful churches sometimes, right? And in a lot of ways, things are kind of laid out for them. And that's one of the ways you can kind of bulletproof yourself against a world that fucking shakes you and breaks you and changes constantly, and different systems are competing, whether it's capitalism from the West or socialism from Europe or whatever it is. All these different things that are competing, economies, wars, relationship cultures or dating cultures from different countries and different cities, which get impacted by technology as well. So again, you can kind of anchor yourself using institutions that have already proved their ability to basically keep someone anchored. So that's one of the ways. But there's also kind of another way, and it's basically something to do with people that don't necessarily want to join themselves to an institution, join themselves to a proven sort of path, and they kind of want to experiment, right? And that comes with risks. If you don't go the traditional route in a lot of ways, you're asking for trouble. But when I say trouble, I don't mean that necessarily bad, but you're asking for uncertainty, basically, right? You're reducing the probability that you're gonna succeed financially, maybe, or maybe you're reducing the probability that you're gonna have emotional support, religious, spiritual support, relational, social support. When you choose to be an experimenter and you choose to be kind of unconventional, you end up kind of having to decide all these things for yourself, and that takes a lot of trial and error. And depending on how social you are or what kind of network you have, it becomes tougher, right? Because if you're someone that's a little bit deracinated like me, and you're not necessarily very grounded somewhere, whether it's a city or whether it's a network, really, or a family structure, or a country even, and you're experimenting, as in you don't really have the most clear path in front of you, right? You don't know where you want to live necessarily. You don't have all these things exactly planned out. Well, yeah, then it becomes very challenging, right? And maybe you like certain traditions, you like certain religions, you like certain spiritual practices, but you've experimented with different ones. Like, I've been on meditation retreats, I've been on church retreats, I've been on I've read books by atheists. I've read books by religious people, by monks, by priests, by Buddhists, by guys like John Gray, the British philosopher who I like a lot. And so, again, this is where navigating Dionysus kind of comes in, right? It's about being able to navigate things, and often without necessarily having some kind of intellectual framework for everything. It's a lot of times it's about following gut instincts, experimenting. It's about getting experience, and then just finding things that feel right, because you can't always find things that make sense. That's another kind of philosophical idea about the limits of like what we can know rationally, right? And some truths can only be kind of felt, you know, and be careful when I say truth. I'm not saying like truth with a capital T. I'm saying some ways of life can be felt. For you individually, you might find something that doesn't make sense but feels right. And everybody is kind of tuned a little bit differently, right? So we can find ways of navigating that makes sense for us individually. Whether it's navigating different countries, finding which city you have chemistry with, which people you have chemistry with. It's not always the people that make sense, right? It's not always the friends that make sense that we end up having as friends. Taleb has a great quote that if you know why if you have a reason for a friendship between you and someone else, then you guys aren't really friends. Because the idea is that if you can easily describe, oh, we're friends because of X, Y, Z, then your friendship is extremely reductive, right? It's kind of limited to that reason, and therefore it's fragile. It's not a true deep friendship, kind of, right? So anyways, I just wanted to kind of throw that in there because a lot of you guys, man, I've met so many of you that are kind of just in this place. You know, Georgia is known as like the edge of empires. It's a country that's kind of right in the middle of all these different forces, all these different giant empires, whether it's Ottoman, the Russians, the Persians. And somehow it managed to survive. And a lot of you guys are kind of like Georgia, man. You guys are in the middle of gigantic fucking forces, corporate forces, economic forces, cultural shifts, technological. And you guys are trying to figure shit out, you know? So you're trying to maintain your health and fitness. You're trying to read a bunch of books, but then you inevitably feel kind of like, sometimes you feel more confused in the end than when you first started, right? And I'm talking to you guys, right? And like, some of you guys eventually kind of make a few really big decisions, right? You join a church, you do this, you do that. But there's a lot of you guys that just never really fully decide. And I think that's actually kind of an interesting angle to take, right? If you don't commit yourself really, sometimes you end up living a life that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but it makes sense to you, right? And so what do you call that? You know, and I call that, those are like the real experimenters, the real navigators. But to navigate at that level, you need a lot of tools. You need a lot of, I still think you need a lot of, I'm gonna call them virtues, but they're tactical virtues. You need abilities to navigate that level of uncertainty, that level of, you know, a lot of you guys don't belong to a church. A lot of you guys don't know how your life's gonna look like in 5 years. You don't have this clear path ahead of you. Maybe you don't have the tightest friends or family structure, you know, and maybe you don't have the most coherent idea of what the world is or what the meaning of life is or whatever. And I know a lot of you guys listening are like this. So again, how do you navigate despite all of that uncertainty? I can say one thing at least, and I've mentioned it just now, but health. Health is paramount, I think, to being especially a kind of a navigator at that level, because you need vitality to be able to cut through the forces of doubt, the forces of loneliness, the forces of just all the mistakes you're going to make and the consequences that come with them. Whether it's relationship mistakes, whether it's spiritual paths you take that lead nowhere or somehow cause consequences to your life, whether it's financial decisions that temporarily set you back, you know? So fitness and health is probably one of the most important aspects of this whole path that you can at least be assured is highly important and undisputable. So that's one of the thing that kind of I fall back on over and over again when I'm feeling uncertain is health. You know, cutting out the booze. Over here, it's fucking tempting to just drink a lot and like smoke cigarettes. Everybody smokes cigarettes in Eastern Europe, so you know, when you had a few drinks, it's easy to start smoking. I got to combat those forces now. But yeah, when the uncertainty really kicks up and you start wondering what the fuck your life's or where your life's going, health is a great place to double down and triple down. You know, getting sunlight, walking around, getting into some like routines that really vitalize your system. Because again, once you vitalize your system, you can come back and face that uncertainty again and learn, experiment more, get some more experiences. And little by little, you start carving out your own path. So, yeah, there's so much to talk about with this topic, but I'll leave it at that. Peace.